Neville Goddard spent the first half of his teaching proving to you that you can have anything. He spent the second half telling you that having it was never the point. Almost no one hears the second half. They arrive, they learn the law, they get the raise and the relationship and the apartment, and they build their whole understanding of him on the getting. What if I told you that the man who taught the most reliable method for obtaining what you want considered that method the easy part, the training wheels, a schoolyard exercise to settle one question so completely that you would never argue with it again? By the end of this video, you will know what he said comes after mastery and why he called it not the law, but the promise. Picture the version of you who has already won. You learned to assume the wish fulfilled. You learned to live in the end. You watched the world rearrange itself around a feeling you held in the dark, and it worked, and then it worked again, until the working stopped surprising you. You became fluent. You became the person who can imagine a state and reliably watch reality catch up to it. Now sit inside that fluency for a moment, because this is where the real story starts. You can have anything. The question that opens the instant you can have anything is quieter and far stranger than any question that came before it. If everything is available, what is any of it actually for? Neville built his entire late teaching around that question, and the answer is the reframe this whole video turns on.
Most people meet Neville through a single promise. Imagination creates reality. Assume the wish fulfilled, and the world conforms to the assumption. It is clean, it is teachable, and for the overwhelming majority of people who find him, it is where the study begins and where it quietly ends. They treat him as a sophisticated instrument for producing money, love, and outcomes. He understood this completely. He was not naive about why people came to him. They came because they wanted things, and he was willing to teach them how to get things, because he knew something they did not yet know. He knew that the wanting was a door, and that walking a person all the way through the door of getting was the only honest way to show them what waited on the far side of it. So he taught the law of assumption without apology. He told a bookkeeper how to imagine her way into a promotion. He told a man estranged from his family how to revise the scene until the estrangement dissolved. He filled an entire book, The Law and the Promise, published in 1961, with case after case of ordinary people who assumed a state and watched it harden into fact. Those stories are not decoration, they are evidence, gathered deliberately. But read the title of that book again, slowly. The Law and the Promise. He put two things in the title, joined by a small word most readers skip. The law is the half you came for. The promise is the half he actually wanted to give you. And he told you, right there on the cover, that the first was leading to the second the entire time. Here is a small thing to carry with you as we go. If this framing is landing, comment with the phrase, "I came for the law." 4 words. Say it if you recognize yourself in the person who arrived wanting things, because almost everyone did, and there is no shame in the door you walked through.
Neville described the law almost as a kind of practice ground, not because manifesting is trivial, but because its purpose is not the object it produces. The purpose is what producing the object proves to you. Each time you assume a state and the world delivers, a conviction settles deeper into you, and the conviction is this: imagination is the one and only creative power operating in your experience. Think about how much resistance that idea meets when you first hear it. Everything in ordinary life argues against it. Circumstances look external. Other people look independent. Money looks like it obeys the economy and not your inner state. You cannot simply be told that imagination creates reality and believe it, because your entire history contradicts the claim. So the law becomes the argument you win against yourself, one result at a time. You imagine, you receive, and a small piece of the old worldview falls away. You do it again, and another piece falls. The manifestations are not the reward. They are the accumulating proof that the thing you were told is actually true, and that proof has to be earned slowly in your own experience because no one can hand it to you. In The Power of Awareness, published in 1952, Neville laid the foundation for exactly this conviction, that consciousness is the one reality, and that your awareness of being is the rock on which everything else is built. That book is the ground floor. It teaches you to master the law. And mastery, once it arrives, does something he warned you about only obliquely. It removes the very reason you started.
Follow the logic all the way down. because this is the hinge of the whole teaching. You practice the law to prove that imagination creates reality. Suppose the proof is complete. Suppose you no longer doubt it, no longer test it, no longer feel the small thrill of surprise when a manifestation lands, because of course it lands. It always lands. That question is closed. What happens to the wanting then? When you know beyond argument that you can have anything, each individual thing loses the desperate charge it used to carry. The apartment stops being salvation and becomes furniture. The relationship stops being rescue and becomes company. The money stops being safety and becomes a number that moves when you decide it should move. Nothing is withheld anymore, and when nothing is withheld, the ache that drove the whole pursuit simply goes quiet. This is the strangest reward imaginable. You spent years learning to get, and the mastery of getting delivers you into a room where getting no longer moves you. You are standing in front of a table piled with everything you ever imagined wanting. And you find, to your genuine surprise, that you are looking past the table, toward a door on the other side of the room. Neville knew that door was coming. He designed the whole first half so you would arrive at it under your own power, satisfied rather than starving, so that the question waiting there would be a real question and not another disguised craving. Only a person who can already have anything can ask it honestly. What is all of this for? A hungry person cannot ask what wealth is for. They only know they lack it. A lonely person cannot ask what love is for. They only know its absence. The question that opens the promise belongs exclusively to the person who has stopped lacking, because it is not a complaint dressed as philosophy. It is what remains after every complaint has been answered. Neville watched this happen in the people around him, and he watched it happen in himself. The techniques worked, the demonstrations piled up, and on the far side of a life he had literally imagined into being, a different hunger appeared, one that no external result could touch, because it was not a hunger for any result at all. It was a hunger to understand what he was, underneath the one who imagines. If you have felt even a trace of this, you already know it is real. The promotion arrives, and the satisfaction has a short half-life. The relationship arrives, and you are still somehow yourself inside it. This is not ingratitude, and it is not a flaw in your technique. It is the built-in ceiling of the law, and Neville treated that ceiling as an invitation, a sign that the first half of the journey had done its work. If this is resonating, take a second to subscribe. There is a great deal more of this work here, and we are only at the threshold of it.
In his later years, Neville changed the emphasis of his teaching, and anyone who follows his lectures across time can hear it happen. Early on, the weight sits on technique, how to assume, how to revise, how to feel the wish fulfilled and persist in it. Later, the weight shifts. He speaks less about how to get and more about what he called an awakening, an inner event he insisted he had passed through himself. He described it as a kind of birth from within, a mystical rebirth that had nothing to do with any outer circumstance. He recounted it through his own visions, and this is the part that demands the most care from anyone who repeats it. These are Neville's accounts, his telling. He offered them as lived experience, the most personal thing he ever shared, and he never dressed them up as facts you could verify from the outside. That distinction matters, and honoring it is the only faithful way to carry his late teaching. He did not stand before an audience and argue a doctrine. He stood before them and reported what he said had happened to him in the intimacy of his own imagination, and he left each listener free to make of it what they would. The visions are testimony, and he wanted them heard as testimony. What the visions all point toward is a single claim, and it is the claim the entire law was quietly preparing you to be able to hear. The purpose of your imagination was never to decorate your outer life. It was to wake you up to what you actually are.
In 1966, Neville published Resurrection, the most mystical of all his works, and the book where the awakening moves from the margins of his lectures to the center of the page. It is not a manual. There is no technique to extract from it and apply on a Tuesday afternoon. It reads instead like a report from a country he claimed to have entered, written for people who might one day enter it themselves. The word he chose is deliberate, resurrection, not improvement, not upgrade, not the better circumstances the law can arrange. A rising of something in you that he said had been asleep, and that once awake reorganizes your entire sense of who is living your life. The manifestations were real. The awakening, he insisted, was on an entirely different order of reality, and it was the one that had been the destination all along. Notice the structure of the whole arc now. First, he teaches you that you are the operant power, that your imagination shapes your world. You practice it, you prove it, you master it. And then, standing in the mastery, he turns to you and says, the being who can shape a world is far more than a technician of outcomes. That being is larger than anything it has been arranging, and the promise is the moment that larger being wakes to itself. There is a real danger he was guarding against here, and it is worth naming plainly. A person can master the law and spend the rest of their life in the room full of furniture, endlessly rearranging it, forever getting the next thing, and never once look toward the door. Mastery without the promise becomes a gilded trap, an eternity of granted wishes, and a self that stayed asleep through all of them.
Sit with that trap for a moment, because it is more seductive than any obstacle you faced on the way in. When you could not get what you wanted, the wanting kept you honest. It kept you reaching, kept you practicing, kept the question alive. But when getting becomes effortless, a subtler failure opens beneath you. You can simply keep getting, forever, and mistake the endlessness for arrival. This is the abyss Neville was pointing at. Not poverty, not failure, not the absence of manifestation. The abyss is a life of perfect manifestation with no awakening in it. A person who can have anything, and who therefore never stops to ask what they are, because the having keeps them pleasantly occupied, distracted by an infinite catalog of granted wishes. He had watched the genre of getting, and he knew its gravity. The law is thrilling. Watching reality bend to your inner state is the most intoxicating experience most people will ever have, and intoxication does not naturally reach for its own end. Left alone, the practitioner of the law will practice the law until they die, richer, and asleep the entire time. So the promise is also a warning, folded inside a gift. It says, do not stop at power. Power over your circumstances is real, and it is only the foothills. The summit is the awakening that power was meant to lead you toward, and it is entirely possible to stand on the foothills with a full pack, admiring your own strength, and never climb.
There is a reason Neville's late lectures feel different from his early ones. Quieter, more inward, less concerned with results. He was no longer selling the things, because he had realized that selling the things too well produced exactly the trap he feared. A teacher who only teaches getting creates a room full of master getters, and a master getter is the hardest person on earth to wake up. So he began to speak past the manifestations, even to audiences who had come for the manifestations. He would grant them the law and confirm that it works. He would confirm that they could have what they wanted, and then, in the same breath, he would redirect them toward the far larger thing he actually wanted them to receive. He was trying to give them the promise while their hands were still full of the law. This is a delicate act, and you can feel him performing it. He never told people to stop wanting. That would have been dishonest, and it would have failed, because you cannot argue a person out of desire. Instead, he let desire run its full course, all the way to satisfaction, trusting that satisfaction itself would open the question that desire had been hiding. He used the law to exhaust the very appetite the law fed. That is the genius of the whole structure, and it is why the two halves belong together. The law is the necessary first half, the exhaustion of wanting, without which the promise cannot even be heard. It is not a lesser teaching that you outgrow. You have to get everything before getting everything can teach you that it was never the point.
So what is the promise, stated as plainly as it can be stated? It is Neville's claim about the purpose of the entire human drama. The whole apparatus of desire and imagination and manifestation points toward a single event, the awakening of the imagination to itself as the source of everything. The I am in you, he taught, is not a tool you use to get things. It is the one reality, briefly convinced it is a person who lacks. The law shows you that your I am shapes your world.
The promise shows you that your I am is the world, and the being having the experience, and the one who was asleep, and the one who wakes. Every manifestation you ever produced was that same power, flexing at a small scale, arranging furniture in a room. The promise is that power turning, at last, to look at its own face. This is why he framed the visions as rebirth. A birth is not something you achieve by better technique. It happens to you, from within, on its own timing, and it changes the identity of the one it happens to. He said it had happened to him. He did not promise you a date. He promised you that it comes, that it is the destination the law was always leading toward, and that when it arrives, you will understand that everything before it was preparation. Hold the paradox at the center of all this, because it is the whole teaching in one line. The law gives you everything you want, so that you can finally discover that you wanted something else the entire time. Getting was the setup, waking was the point, and you could not have known that from the beginning, because only the person who has already gotten everything is in a position to believe it.
None of this means you abandon the law. That is the mistake in the other direction, and it is just as much a dead end as endless getting. Someone hears about the promise and decides that manifesting is beneath them, that they are too spiritual to want things. They have simply built a new and more flattering trap. Neville never asked you to stop using the law. He asked you to stop believing it was the summit. So you keep imagining, you keep assuming the wish fulfilled, keep applying revision to the scenes that need it, keep living in the end of what you desire. But you carry it now with a different weight, because you know what the practice is really for. Each demonstration is not just a granted wish, it is another confirmation of the one truth the promise rests on, that the power doing all of this is you, and that it is on its way to waking up. This is a lighter way to live, and Neville seemed to know it. The things stop being emergencies. The manifestations stop being proof you need to keep collecting anxiously, and become something closer to play, the natural overflow of a being who has remembered what it is. You imagine because imagining is your nature, not because you are still trying to convince yourself of anything. And underneath the play, the deeper thing continues its own slow work. The awakening does not wait for you to be finished with the law. It ripens inside the ordinary practice, in the quiet after each fulfilled desire, in the growing suspicion that the one who keeps getting everything is far more than a person collecting a life.
Come back to the room one last time, the table piled high with everything you ever wanted. The version of you who mastered the law and can have any of it, all of it, whenever you choose. For most of the journey, that table was the whole world. Every technique, every revision, every night spent living in the end was aimed at filling it. And now you stand there, full, and you feel the pull of the door on the other side. That pull is the promise. It was there from the first day you learned to assume a wish, quietly drawing you forward through every result you ever produced. The getting was never resisting the awakening. The getting was carrying you toward it, one fulfilled desire at a time, until you had enough behind you to turn around and ask what you truly are. Neville gave his life to both halves, and he refused to let anyone keep only the first. The law is real, and it will give you everything. The promise is realer still, and it will give you the one thing the everything was always pointing at. You wake up. You discover that the imagination you used to get a better life was the very thing you were meant to become conscious of. That was the secret hiding inside the whole method. So take the law as far as it goes, master it, use it, let it hand you the life you imagined, and when the table is full and the ache is quiet, do not mistake the furniture for the destination. Turn toward the door. That is where he was always pointing. If this is the half of Neville you've been missing, subscribe for the rest.